Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining Peer's meeting tonight. It would be nice if you keep yourself muted, number one. And number two, why don't you drop in the chat where you're joining us from so we know what town and state you might be in if you are out of state. So thank you for that. And we'll give it another minute for other folks to sign in. Okay, great. Babylon, Wading River, East Hampton. Wonderful. Okay. Good number of people in Riverhead. That's great. Sag Harbor. Excellent. Manhattan. Okay. All right. Okay, so why don't we just get started and folks will join us in progress. So my name is Catherine Zoka, and I'm the co-chair of Peer. Peer members live on the lands of the Shinnecock, Montaukett, and Manhasset nations, and we're grateful for the stewardship that they have provided for these lands over the millennia so that we can enjoy them today. PEER stands for Progressive East End Reformers, and we are a chapter of the statewide organization NIPAN, New York Progressive Action Network, and also the nationwide organization Indivisible. PEER is based in eastern Suffolk County. And our work is focused on educating and advocating for social justice, healthcare, housing, and issues that affect the lives of all Long Islanders, in particular immigration, which we will address this evening. And I'll drop in the chat after shortly about how you can join Peer if you are interested. Membership is $15 to $25, and it enables people to vote on key issues like candidate endorsements that we have going forward. So I want to start tonight with a really exciting breaking announcement about healthcare, and in particular about the New York Health Act. I don't know if all of you are aware, but the Campaign for New York Health Act is going to have a press conference in Albany this coming Monday. And at the press conference, they're going to unveil the results of budget analysis that they have done, which shows enormous and vast savings for the different municipalities in New York. And Jerry, I'm going to ask you to let people in as they come in the waiting room, if you don't mind, please. The Campaign for New York Health Act has analyzed 11 counties, including Suffolk, 23 school districts, and over 10 towns, some on Long Island. And the amount of savings per municipality, as I said, is eye-dropping. So what will happen after the press conference is that they're going to come out with a campaign that all of us individually can engage in order to move the New York Health Act to the floor for a vote in Albany this session. And this coming Monday at 7:30, the Long Island hub for the campaign of New York Health Act will have a meeting at 7:30. And if you're interested, we welcome you to join us, and I'll drop in the chat the registration link for that. Okay, so I've just let the people in. So now Peer has been working for over 10 years on different social justice issues, and we firmly believe that resistance requires a vision for the way forward. And tonight's meeting is going to highlight OLA's visionary legislation with two of its creators and a board member. We have the former Assembly member from the East End, Fred Thiele, with us, who for many years authored and supported landmark legislation in the state, including the Community Preservation Fund, the Community Housing Fund. He was a big supporter of Greenlight New York and many other groundbreaking pieces of legislation. Fred is going to be joined with the executive director of OLA, Minerva Perez, whose concept for the legislation, it was her concept to come up with the legislation that we'll be talking about tonight. And Rebecca Dolber, who is on the board of OLA, is going to be joining us. Rebecca is a longtime grassroots activist, and she was formerly with East End Action Network. So it's auspicious that we're meeting today because I saw earlier in my social media feed that ICE was spied in Southampton. They have been frequently present in Riverhead, Hampton Bays, and Greenport. So what we can expect tonight to try to combat that is to have a moderated discussion where we'll have a detailed explanation of the legislation, description of the towns and village boards' jurisdiction over police departments, what the current status of the legislation is in the different towns and villages, and what the next steps are, and how we can best advocate. So that's a lot. Please post questions that you have in the chat, and Jerry's going to monitor the chat, and we'll ask those questions at appropriate breaking points. So, Fred, why don't you start us out tonight with an explanation of the legislation, highlighting the interaction between the municipalities, the boards, and the police departments.
Well, certainly. Well, first of all, thanks for having us here today. As I was saying before everybody was let in, when I was a state assemblyman, I had the opportunity several times a year to speak to the members of PEER, and it does feel a little bit like old home week. So it's good to be back, but I'm here in a different capacity, and that is as a member of the OLA board. And I want to thank Minerva for giving me the opportunity to serve in this capacity as a member of OLA, a member of their board. And, people wonder, well, what are you going to do when you retire? And I had to find a new way to get into what the late Congressman John Lewis would say is good trouble. How do you get into good trouble? And this is kind of how I'm doing that. And it's been a pleasure to be able to work with OLA at this very critical time. And part of that really has been this local legislation. There's saying in the environment that, think globally, but act locally. And I think that's the same thing with social justice. And, we're dealing with an enormous problem, but we need to act locally. And the public safety and accountability local law is that reaction, or that response, I should say, to our desire to keep the community safe, provide public safety for all the residents of the community, recognizing that the excesses of ICE and the federal government have created fear in the community, and how best can we respond locally to restoring and providing public safety and having people feel safe in their community, whether it's to have their children go to school, go to the doctor, go to church, wherever it is. And that really is how this came about. And, it really was the brainchild of Minerva, who handed me a bunch of research and basically said, what can we do with this? And I had the opportunity to be able to work with her extremely closely and kind of putting something together tonight, which is what we're going to talk about. So I really want to get to that. And before we get to the nuts and bolts of the legislation, I want to put this in a little bit of context. One of the things, for example, that comes up is, well, why can't local government do this? And why doesn't the state do that? And, and when it comes to dealing with ICE and what is going on with that. And so I'm going to give like a 3-minute tutorial on constitutional law and how it applies here, and federal government, state government, local government. I used to actually teach a constitutional law class at Southampton College when there was a Southampton College. But, very quickly, when it comes to immigration and immigration enforcement, under the United States Constitution, the federal government, that's a power that's been delegated by the Constitution to the federal government. And so the federal government has plenary and unqualified authority over immigration enforcement. And that's exercised through the Congress, which makes laws, and through the executive branch that enforces the law. And the court's role is they pay substantial deference to whatever the federal government does in this area, except with regard to the need for due process. And I think that's something we're all aware of, and probably we'll talk about a little bit more. So, it's a power that's delegated to the federal government. The supremacy clause, federal, state government cannot supersede what federal government does. So when it comes to immigration and enforcement, that's a federal power. However, those powers not given to the federal government are retained by the states, local government, and the people. And most notably with regard to that is the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, which gives those powers that haven't been given to the federal government, as I said, are reserved to the states, local governments, and people. And that 10th Amendment is important for a number of reasons. One is that's the reason why the federal government cannot force states to enforce federal immigration laws, only through voluntary cooperation. And of course, that's a part of discussion. But most importantly, for what we're talking about tonight, is the police power. The authority is retained by the states and local government to provide for the public health, safety, and welfare of its residents. And this local law was drafted to allow the local governments and our East End community to fully utilize their police power to protect the public safety of our residents. So, so there's a federal role, there's a state role, and there's a local role. We're focused tonight on the local role. The other thing that I just wanted to spend a minute of time is, what's happening on Long Island doesn't happen in a vacuum. What happens on the East End or the South Fork, there's a bigger picture out there. And I guess I just can't help myself because I was in the state legislature, but immigration enforcement and protection of immigrants is front and center right now in Albany. And what we're trying to do here locally, we have to pay attention to what's going on other level of government. As you know, the state is attempting to pass a budget. It is about 5 weeks late. It's getting close. This is the time of year when I know that I made the right decision and that it was the right time to retire, when the budget is about 5 weeks late. But part of the budget negotiations is immigration protection. And the governor had proposed back in January a ban on state and local government cooperation agreements with ICE, so-called 287 agreements. Since then, the legislature has been looking to expand it. The discussions that are occurring are with such things as prohibiting masks being used by ICE in the state of New York, also banning enforcement operations in sensitive public locations like schools, churches, daycare, senior centers, parks. All of that is pending, but it is currently being discussed. And it is part of the climate that we're asking local governments to act in. So those are kind of the preliminaries. So let's get to what we're really talking about tonight and the main thrust of the discussion, and that is the proposed public safety and accountability local law, which we envision as the use of local government policy power to provide public safety for its residents. And the rationale for this legislation is that excesses of ICE enforcement have created fear within the public and pose a threat to public safety. Through transparent exercise of the local police power, the local law seeks to alleviate fear within the community and better provide for public safety. And the public benefits, I'm sure, are evident to all of you. Just one thing that was in the paper this week: school attendance. The percentage of people that are not in children that are not in school is at record highs. Now, some of that is still kind of an outgrowth or an impact from the pandemic, but a lot of it on Long Island has been also fear from ICE enforcement and sending children to school, et cetera. The economic impact, traditional industries such as the trades, farming, agriculture, the hospitality industry, all of these major industries on the East End, are concerned about, keeping employees and their employees being safe. Those are the reasons for doing this local law. So the process by which the local law was drafted, and I mentioned at the beginning, and that was, Minerva did a lot of research, particularly what was going on in other parts of the country. She gave it to me. I came up with the first draft, and we felt that it was imperative to have broad input and discussion with regard to this local law. So Minerva OLA through Minerva circulated it to our local East End towns and villages. discussions were held formally and informally with local officials. There was a Zoom meeting with local East End towns and villages to discuss the local law. We got their input. We heard their concerns, their questions, and their suggestions, and we revised the original proposal, incorporating those comments to come up with a draft model local law, which we then forwarded again to local governments with the understanding that one size doesn't fit all, that we have a model local law that hits the main points that we thought should be hit, but that it would need to be adapted. As we all know, Southold is a little different than Southampton. North Haven is a little bit different than West Hampton Beach. They all have their local situations. So, it was, we gave them the model local law, but we said, we welcome whatever modifications or changes consistent with the intent of the law that you might want to make. And that has been the case with the local communities that are considering this, and they have made some changes. So let me just give you an outline of the local law. First is the legislative findings, which I've kind of outlined what the findings were, why we're doing this, why it's a legal exercise of the local police power and doesn't run afoul of federal immigration authority. It's got definitions. You have to define your terms. But the substantive provisions are, first, a federal immigration enforcement reporting system. So that when, it was today in Southampton Village, when ICE shows up in a local community and local police respond to ICE showing up in the community, that information would be immediately reported to the local town supervisor or village mayor, depending on the situation, so that the supervisor and mayor would be notified immediately. That information would be shared with the towns and village boards, respectively, and ultimately that information would be shared with the public. The local law would also create an immigration enforcement task force, advisory to the local government. So there's always a full discussion of what's going on in the community, how the community should respond, and where the community has a lifeline to local government to have input on this very, very important issue. The model local law also had provisions with regard to the prohibition of immigration enforcement operations in certain public areas of local government property. And, that is something that's also, as I mentioned, is being discussed on the state level about limiting sensitive areas where enforcement actions could occur. The next provision deals with identification, and it recognizes the right that local law enforcement under state law has the authority to ask ICE for identification. It is a crime in the state of New York to impersonate a federal or state law enforcement officer. And if that officer has no identification, the only way you can find out whether or not they're committing a crime is by asking for identification. We also provided provisions for the enforcement of the local law. And then there's the technical provisions that all local laws have to have, and an effective date that would be immediately upon its passage. So that was the draft that we gave. I'm sure Minerva will get into this, but already East Hampton Village modified the local law, but has adopted a local law. And tomorrow in East Hampton Town, there's a public hearing on their local law. And to kind of show you the things, some of the modifications. For example, tomorrow, the law that's being heard in the town of East Hampton, they added to our local law by providing a provision prohibiting any 287G cooperation of their local police force with ICE. So they even added on to the local law that we had. East Hampton Village had that. They added that provision also. So I'm going to stop there. I think it kind of gives, try to give an overview of the times that we were in, what local government can do, and what we felt would be legally supportable, that would help our community deal with what is going on, in the community that's creating such fear and disruption, and the potential for even more, as we found out in Southampton Village today. So I'm going to stop there. I think Minerva's next, but Catherine, I'll let you introduce her, and I think Minerva is going to talk about more about the lobbying effort and what's been going on with that.
Yeah, listen,
Thank you.
Fred. Thank you, Fred. We appreciate you really very succinctly describing the legislation for us so that we understand the different parameters within it. And, Minerva, I know Fred touched upon the fact that, you went through several draft iterations with the local officials. And, maybe you want to give a little background to how that whole process, how you went about that, and now where you see it is within each town. And I know Riverhead in particular is frustrated with trying to get that board to pass it. So maybe you can even speak directly to that township. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. Thank you. And thank you, Fred, for laying it all out like that. I think it's really, really important for folks to understand kind of what this is actually made of. And I think when you start hearing what's included in this, it feels almost like, yeah, of course. Like, why is this so difficult? And I think what that brings us to the crux of the matter is for OLA in terms of seeing this now, at least since I've been around since 2016, is that our independent municipalities that have their own police departments, which are 10 municipalities, can be a beautiful, beautiful thing in their perfect kind of situations. When we have sort of national forces pushing against those individual bubbles of perfection, the tide can turn. And then suddenly what we have here are local governments simply saying there's nothing they can do. When there are agents coming out and sort of breaking what we know to be public safety and order and safety, whether we love or hate or have issues here and there with how towns are running certain things or law enforcement. Quite honestly, there's a lot of safe and non-chaotic ways that our towns and our villages are being run. The fact of the matter, whether you like them or not, is when ICE comes to town to do these random raids, there is chaos, there is injury, there is panic, there is fear, and none of it is necessary. So if people were truly going for the person who was a violent criminal, they'd be able to find that person in a millisecond on a database, go to their home, pick them up, and take them. I'm not saying I love that idea, but there's a way to do that when you're not just absolutely throwing up public safety for everyone, not just Latinos, but everyone that lives in a town or a village. So this law was created to find ways to kind of bring back, to kind of sort of stop the bleed of chaos, of confusion, of not knowing who the helpers are. And in our community, Latino members of our community want to look at law enforcement as the helpers. They want to look at the towns and the villages that are running things as authority and the helpers. And you can't do that when you've got those very same people throwing their hands up every time a wild random raid happens and they say, nothing we can do. That's not how we build that trust and that cohesion as a community or as a series of 10 municipalities with law enforcement. So this law was created to bring that back in. And so right now, I would say that I'll answer the first question about the process. There's only been, I think, 3 versions. The first version, there was a second version, and then we brought that out to our town and village leadership. Everyone attended that Zoom meeting, and I was happily surprised, except for Riverhead and Southampton Village. Every other municipality was present, either with its leadership and also law enforcement, because we also reached out and made sure that all police chiefs received the proposed law the minute that we sent it out. So it was all town and village leadership and police chiefs. And so that meeting that occurred where a lot was sort of hashed out, there were points that were made that at first I thought I didn't understand it, but I think ultimately we heard it from so many people. It was the right thing to do to kind of boil the law down a little bit. But there was a provision in our law that said you must request identification from this person purporting to be an agent or running some sort of raid, a person with a mask and a gun, you must request identification, knowing that our local law enforcement might not receive that identification, but the request was something that we wanted in law. We really got a lot of pushback on that from all different backgrounds, different, sides of the aisle, saying that they did not want to put their local law enforcement in a confrontational position. They didn't want to have that confrontation. And for me, I couldn't understand why requesting identification. It was a confrontation. But it ended up being important that we boiled that down a little bit. And so in this law, it makes it very clear that local law enforcement has every right under state statute, as Fred has pointed out, to request identification. And that's how it lives in the law right now, which we feel is important. And the law is still extremely strong because it's taking a step that sets us on the path of accountability and an actual law. It's not a suggestion. It's not a nod to do the right thing. It's not a statement. It's a law and it has accountability. So it's still a very, very important thing to move forward on. So I'll say that. And as we move, we certainly know that sort of strategies or just how local governments and law enforcement leadership are kind of feeling about things as it evolves. We knew this was a long conversation. This wasn't OLA throws out a law and everyone must accept it. It was OLA does the heavy lifting via Fred Thiele. I mean, I had some ideas, but he did the heavy lifting. We throw it out there, and then from that moment, let's have some serious discussion about why a law is necessary and how we move that forward. The process of that is first just having conversations that are not just adversarial or unhealthy. Moving it to the point, ideally, where there is a work session, so that officially the town board or the village board are discussing it in a public capacity. And then after that, the idea would be that it goes to public hearing where people can weigh in on whatever side or interest they have. And then there's a vote. And then if it's voted in, which we want it to be across the board, we would like to see all 10 municipalities that have their own law enforcement agencies to vote this forward in the version, as Fred said, that best fits them, but keeps to the color of this and the intention of this law. So right now, where we're at is East Hampton Village has moved forward with unanimous vote. We were able to be involved in a work session where I was able to hear each of the village board members speak affirmatively as to why they thought this was important. So that was great. It didn't feel like a begrudging yes. It felt like they understood it and they spoke really well about why this was important. The next vote, now that it's a public hearing at East Hampton, I believe, Fred, that they have the same version of the law where they're also keeping in a ban on 287G. Am I correct or incorrect?
They are both the village and the town have a ban on 287G agreements in their local laws. So It goes further than was in our model local law. And as you know, is also part of the discussion in Albany.
Exactly. So I think today's, an article that came out today about 287G. But the reality is the towns and the villages can decide that they don't want to enter into 287G. And that's absolutely what they can do, which is very different than Kathy Hochul saying the state is not allowed to do it, which she has the right to do as well. I talked with Fred earlier about, is that any kind of sort of reverse impediment to the Constitution? And he said, absolutely not. The state has the ability to say that they will not enter into 287G. That's not taking away rights from municipalities because the state is the state. And within that are those municipalities. So, but the federal government for Tom Homan to say that if Kathy Hochul were to enact all these different things that she's doing, no masks, no 287G, that he would then force immigration upon New York State as a result, the wonderful bullying tactics that are being used. But from a local perspective, that's where we're at with East Hampton Village. Tomorrow, East Hampton Town will have a public hearing. We are feeling pretty positive, but I don't take anything for granted. And so we do hope that it passes. We're going to have people there speaking out in favor. We hope that as many people can be there or on Zoom because they do accept those statements as well. I will tell you that right before that, I'm going to be driving to Riverhead to finally have a meeting with the supervisor of Riverhead. So that's what's on my books is Halpin and I forget one other person. I've asked who else is going to be there. I don't know if it's going to be a bevy of lawyers. I have no idea, but I'll be going there and to discuss the law because there's been a lot of misinformation kind of flying through. And originally, people saying we don't want to talk about it. Well, what about it don't you like? And then he would say, I don't know, I didn't read it, but I don't want to talk about it. So this is a really great movement forward. And it's kind of what we expect. So we don't expect people to just throw up their hands and say, "Oh, thank you so much, Ola, and thank you, Fred." We know there's going to be fear. There's sort of a misjudgment on what this is. They're missing a piece of it because it has an Ola stamp on it at the moment, but we're not looking to retain that stamp. Right now, East Hampton Village is calling it whatever they're calling it. That's lovely. Call it whatever, call it East Hampton Village public safety law. That's perfectly fine. You've made it your own. But I think it's just kind of getting over that hump of, wait a minute, this actually is honoring local law enforcement. We are stating that local law enforcement has been doing a good enough job with public safety or safety that we don't need ICE to be coming here and doing that. If you have a violent felon, there are pathways to get that person if they are breaking all kinds of laws and whatever. But we feel that there is a disrespect, honestly, to local law enforcement to say that you're not safe enough on the east end of Long Island, so we're going to come and make you safer when they're running red lights and scaring children from not going to school, and parents are not bringing their kids to doctor's appointments because they're too afraid to be in the Riverhead area specifically. So that's kind of where we're at. Southold has put together a task force. I won't speak too much about that kind of off the record, except to say that it was a bit of a slowdown technique to say, oh, yeah, you want to talk about this law? Well, we're going to create a task force to think about this law or to see if it's necessary. But I want to make sure at the end of this, which I think they've had their last meeting, they're going to have 5 meetings, to see what that task force, whether in unison or, in a united way or a separate way, what they bring forward as their recommendations. And then I would like to continue to advocate based on what they're saying. And because we just want to make sure that information is real. And we have heard, not necessarily from Southold, but from other places, a worry that this law will create a bevy of lawsuits. I could create my own bevy of lawsuits. Anyone can. So leading government or leading in any capacity with a constant fear of someone can sue me because I have a blue cup of tea, is not a way to lead. And it's not an excuse that can be given when there are other laws in our town code and our town and village government that could be just as contentious. So this is one that focuses on public safety and how we protect each other and how the town helps and the village helps to kind of sort of reinforce what it is they have the right to do. So that's kind of where it's at. South Sag Harbor, I'm giving them a little bit of air. There's nonsense going on there, but it's not necessarily going to be to our benefit to kind of push in this moment. We'd like to see what leadership is going to be evolving from the resignation of the mayor. Southampton Village, we're going to certainly be going back to revisit that. I did have a meeting. They gave me 5 minutes during a work session. It was very lovely of them. It looked like they had no intention of doing anything beyond that, but we're not stopping because that's not what we can do. I will say as an example, today's raid, not raid, it wasn't a raid. Today ended up being a targeted action in Southampton. And we learned that on our own. But as an exercise that I always do is I reached out to the mayor, Bill Manger, and I reached out to the police chief, Suzanne Hurto, and I said, this raid just happened about an hour ago. Can you share any information with me on that? Is this a judicial warrant-based action? Do you know anything about this? And she got back pretty quickly and said she didn't have any idea about it. And that in itself kind of proves our point. I found out the information. This actually was a targeted raid for someone that did have a particular criminality in the background. I won't get into the details, but it's just more complicated. But the fact that whether she did or she didn't have the information, her telling me she had no information makes the point. Why wouldn't she? Why wouldn't she have some idea that there were 3 or 4 cars there with many agents there in an area that's heavily populated and not too far away from where people are driving to school or going to school or coming back from school? So it just makes the point. So those are some answers to those questions, Catherine. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Minerva. And so if I understand correctly, then Southampton only gave you 5 minutes in a work session?
Southampton Village.
Or the village. What about Southampton Town?
So Southampton Town, a lot of what we're doing is continuing to get the word out. Having people out there speaking on behalf of this law has been extremely important. And sometimes when I'm not there, actually even almost more importantly, when I'm not there, because it's showing the towns in the village that other people, Latino, non-Latino, folks of all different backgrounds, have an interest in public safety. So what we've been doing at this moment, since we're so close, we really want to see what happens with East Hampton Town, because if we have a village and a town, which is showing law enforcement leadership at a town level and a village level, because if they felt it was absolutely unsafe for their law enforcement officers to be entering into this, new law, there's no way it would be happening. The reality is it's not harming, it's only helping, and it's creating a different relationship. And it is groundbreaking because it's establishing, I'll say something, which I think is important to share, is that I've been working with law enforcement now even since before OLA, 6 years running a domestic violence shelter. Law enforcement is critically important to the health and the safety of our East End. It is, and especially to some folks that are more vulnerable. We need to have a good relationship. We need to have good communication, good relationship, trust, all of that. So years ago, when another particular thing was going on, I went directly to law enforcement leadership because I felt, I'm not sure if there's any elected leaders currently on this, on this Zoom, but I felt that the strength didn't lie with them. It was in the house of law enforcement, that they were the ones that were going to tell me if it was possible to stop honoring administrative warrants. That I knew that local leadership was worried about that. And they were going to, if I went to them, they were going to look to their law enforcement and say, what should we do? Even though that was against the Constitution to be honoring administrative warrants. So I went only to law enforcement. And I only worked with them to understand what their pushback, holdback was. I did the same thing for Greenlight New York because I wanted to see local law enforcement in unison support this very important move when they were telling me over and over again, we wouldn't be giving them tickets if there was a legal way to be on the road with insurance. And lo and behold. So this time around, because this is so huge and so important, it was critical to not waste any time to be going through and kind of testing the waters. It doesn't mean I don't respect law enforcement or that OLA doesn't respect, but it means that we have to shift back the paradigm of our police commissioners in the position of town and village boards. They are the ones that run our local law enforcement. They are the ones that ultimately have the responsibility to make these decisions. So that's why I did not do that again. We went right to elected leaders.
No, great. Thanks for clarifying that. And really a big thanks for all you've done to put this legislation to the point where it's going to be passed by 2 out of 10, and hopefully the rest will follow suit with that. Just a clarification, because I know that in Hampton Bays, in Riverhead, ICE agents have mustered at fire departments. So I'm wondering if this legislation in any way prohibits or restrains that.
Fred, there's a clause.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and the focus in Albany has been on sensitive locations, but the question that came up, particularly in Hampton Bays, is, how can ICE agents be utilizing, fire district property, which is the case, it was firehouses, and nobody knows about it. And Minerva can probably talk to this more than I can, but some of the conversations I had with local officials, they didn't have any idea that ICE was coming in and utilizing those properties. But as far as the local law, fire districts, they have their own governance structure outside of villages. So we did put a provision in, though, of not utilizing public public property, town property, village property, unless there was a warrant, you had a judicial warrant, or there were exigent circumstances, which is legalese for it's an emergency. We don't have time to get a warrant, but it's so we did put some provisions in there. Interestingly, East Hampton did not include that. Town, it did not, and I'm not sure. I don't think the village did either. But the idea of what properties could be used that's something that's being discussed in as part of the Albany stuff right now. So we tried to address it the best we could, and the best we could do it was, well, no, unless you have a warrant or, it's an exigent circumstance.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Fred. I mean, mentioning Albany and statewide legislation, I'm wondering how you feel that's going to play out if indeed the ability to restrict ICE from fire departments and even police departments, because I know that in Riverhead they have met at the police department. How do you think that's going to play out in Albany? Do you have a
Well,
sense
I
of
had
that?
a policy of not predicting what the legislature would do, even when I was in it. So I'm not sure. Here's what I will say. I don't know what the details are going to be. From what I'm told, when I talk to some of my old colleagues up there on this issue, is that they have an agreement that's kind of 99% there. And, the governor proposed no 287G agreements. And the legislature wanted to go further. So it's going to be more than that. The mask provisions there's some potential legal exposure on that. Can a state tell a federal law enforcement agency how to run that agency as far as, masks and things of that nature? But that is on the table. And as I mentioned, the sensitive locations exclusion for operations is on the table. I think there'll be some version of all of that in the final bill. What I don't know is exactly what that's going to look like, because I'm not sure they know exactly what it's going to look like. But I think there will be a state law adopted as part of the budget on this subject, that it will be more than the governor proposed. I just don't know what all the details on that are going to be yet.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, it's really an unfair question for me to ask you, but it's good to know that they're actually looking at more than just the 287G agreement. So we'll see how that plays out in terms of advocacy, which will now turn to Rebecca. But people can call the governor and the leaders of the Assembly and the Senate to urge them to go further. So,
Excuse
Rebecca,
me,
this is perfect
Catherine.
for you.
I was
Yes.
going to say, before we go on to advocacy, there is a question we do have in the chat, and this could be for both Fred and Minerva. And it's from Des Diorio. What is the mechanism for enforcement, and what is the consequence for federal officers who fail to comply with the local law in the municipalities that have adopted it?
Okay. So enforcement. So the law has certain provisions in it, and what happens if the local government doesn't comply with those provisions? They don't report to the town board. So it would be, it would be the same as any other action where government is supposed to do something and they don't. A taxpayer in the jurisdiction, if it's the village or the town, would have the ability to. It's like the Freedom of Information Law. You can bring a legal action to mandate the local governments to comply. So there's that. The question of there's nothing in this local law that requires a federal agent or federal ICE agent to do anything, because we don't have that authority.
No.
So it's more about, if the local government doesn't comply with its own law, there's a legal mechanism. The local law, because, of the Constitution, there's nothing that we or a town or a village can mandate a federal enforcement officer to do that would generate an enforcement kind of thing. That's the interesting part I mentioned with regard to the state law, with regard to masks. That's where this would come up, and I'm not sure what the enforcement mechanism would be. I assume because it's the state level that the Attorney General could bring an action with regard to that, but that would be a statewide thing rather than a local thing.
I think the only thing that I'll add to that is that if we have this law in place and an ICE action is happening that requires law enforcement to respond, so they're there, and their body cameras are on. I mean, if there is an incident that is obviously illegal, going above and beyond some scenario like a Minnesota scenario or something, Minneapolis, would be there would be additional evidence on someone's body camera and it would be coming from law enforcement. So there are just other elements in terms of how things might be done from a federal agency. There are just other elements that might be in place in a more consistent way if this law is in place as well.
Can I just ask a corollary to that? I mean, what is the enforcement for local police who may not ask questions of ICE, like requesting ID? I mean, is there, or if they don't have any, if they don't stop anything that seems to be out of control between ICE and residents?
Well, I want to jump in there. First of all, in the law, it doesn't say they must request ID. It says they may request ID, and it gives the reasons in the laws why they may request it. So therefore, if they choose not to, that's something that will be clear because they were there. They reported back to their supervisor that there was an ICE raid, and it will not be documented they requested because they didn't. And it is what it is, right? In terms of ICE, local agents, local law enforcement stopping ICE, they cannot do that. They cannot do that. So it's important to make that distinction because we don't want to pretend that something is when what it isn't. But if we had a situation where, let's say, there was a plan in place for what to do in Riverhead if ICE was doing a random raid in front of a school. And so let's say in advance there was an emergency plan, like you have a hurricane prevention or hurricane emergency plan that you've coordinated with the school to know that in front of that particular elementary school, if they're on that road and that road, if ICE is there, that law enforcement will be there and maybe they will be standing there to make sure kids are getting out of the school onto the school bus. Maybe there's a provision where a police officer is following a school bus to make sure that those kids get at least into the home. I don't know. But the reality is that if in the middle of all that, ICE jumps out and tries to take a mom who comes out of the door, our local law enforcement will not have the authority to stop ICE from doing that. They will be there. They will be witnessing it. Their cameras will be witnessing it. What we know to be a part of this law and a good unwritten reason for it is we need to connect the fabric of our community back. Our local law enforcement doesn't want to be the bad guy, they want to be the good guy and the hero. If they don't want to be in those scenarios, quite honestly, I think it's uncomfortable for them. I think it's awkward in the highest degree for them to be able to be there and witness this. But it's important that we're all a part of it. We can't just relegate that off to the nonprofits and the churches and the few people that are part of the rapid response, the many people part of the rapid response. We need to connect that accountability and the kind of care that we have for each other, what law enforcement would normally be doing if a bunch of men jumped out of a truck with masks and guns. So that's what this does. And we are believing that with that law in place, there's going to be a different level of understanding about what this actually does look like. And people are looking to you. Brown people, black people, white people are looking to you to say, please, this is not right. This is not how we run our towns and our villages.
Great, thank you. I mean, I think it's brilliant to really bring the law enforcement in an embrace and let them know they're part of the community, and that's really wonderful. Jerry, are there other questions in the chat?
No, the only one is asking how we can support this legislation, how everyone can do that. And that's the entree, I guess, for Rebecca.
Well, actually, I think that Dave Denton might have a question.
Oh, he has a, might have just appeared. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Is there any recourse for those illegally detained and have lost wages and or employment, asking as a local union rep?
Yeah, interesting. Not that we've seen personally at all. I mean, not even an apology. So people have been taken without any criminal background whatsoever. And the biggest thing you could hope for is they actually get released. But and even speaking of union, we had a couple of people taken from Pindar Vineyards. And so that union leader reached out in a really great, strong way to the state government to really push back against what had happened. And I think everything like that can play a positive role. And you never know. You never know what's going to work or not work. But I think in terms of any of those kinds of very important groups, I would love to see the Farm Bureau eventually take a more public stance. It doesn't mean that you're hiring unlawful or unlawfully documented people that are not able to work. You've got people that are in the process of getting their documentation that have work permits that are absolutely legal. Of course, right now this government is making it harder to renew those work permits, which is also making it harder for our businesses to have workforces. But those were legal processes to renew and re-up your work authorization. We have an immigration team of 2 full-time immigration lawyers, and that's part of what we do. We have these clinics and whatnot. But we need to see those industries. So I'm doing a lot of talking behind the scenes with restaurant industries, construction, landscaping. The Farm Bureau should be one as well, where we're kind of looking at this from a public safety perspective. We're not asking for everything because it's very difficult to do that for everybody, but we're asking to at least make sure that we're moving this particular needle. Yeah.
Hmm.
And Rebecca, just so you know, you might be doing the same thing, but here at 6:39 in the chat, I added the link for the Google form that has some information in case you weren't going to do it.
And you know what, Fred, maybe this is for you, but and this may be a New York State thing addressing isn't there legislation about theft of wages from employers? And maybe that's only employers
No,
for,
no, no. So OLA actually has the highest number of wage theft cases, and we handle all of those. So we get wage theft cases from a range between people that are contracting, people that are salaried workers, and it is against the law, whether you're documented or not, to be worked and not paid. But there are different recourses for that, and sometimes, and not the federal government right now, but the State Department of Labor is one. The Attorney General's office sometimes is another, and sometimes it's a strongly worded demand letter where we explain what the charges would be if we were able to pull together lawyers to do that, which I'm not saying that we have, that in terms of what larceny looks like or what some of these charges might look like. And sometimes that frees up the money. No threats, just simply here's the law. Don't withhold wages or don't withhold money. But it's absolutely a problem. And the highest level we've ever seen is right now.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah, good.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay, thank you, Minerva. And I just want to point out that Dave also mentioned in the chat something that I think, Minerva, you can definitely relate to, that there are a lot of people who are citizens who are still extremely scared about going to work because there have been citizens who have been rounded up. So I don't know if you want to speak to that briefly and before we go to Rebecca, but I just wanted to put that out into the conversation.
I think a great point to make is that I don't know if it's NYC, ACLU, but there's an organization right now that is bringing suit because of the profiling nature of how these raids are happening. So that whether you're a citizen or not, depending upon what you look like, you could be scooped up. So they really put together a lot of information. I think a fair amount of proof and evidence that this profiling approach is unconstitutional and yeah, there's a reason, even if you are a citizen, but you look a certain way, does it, if you're taking your child to school and you see an ICE action happen, do you really want your child to see you taken away by accident? All of these things, make a huge dent in how we go about our daily life.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So, Rebecca, please, as a activist, grassroots activist, come and tell us what we can do, what's been happening, and going forward, how we be most effective.
Yeah, sure. So I want to thank you too for facilitating the conversation with Fred, Minerva, and I and your peer group. My background is in the grassroots organizing, and one question that I would get all the time from people when we would do any sort of action is this really doing anything? And what I love about this law is that it's a tangible way to create change and to track that change, see the results of that organizing in real time. While my tenure at OLA on the board of OLA is in its infancy stages, I was so excited to run with advocating for this legislation specifically because it felt like I had something in my hands to work with, and maybe other people who have spoken in front of boards felt that way too. The accountability piece of this legislation, I think, is huge. We're not asking anyone to break or bend the law. We're holding people accountable to serve the community in a way that they said that they would do. While Fred did give us a very good outline of the law, I personally don't think you have to know the ins and outs of law in general, local laws or otherwise, to stand in front of a board and advocate for something like this. I'm not a lawyer, I make jewelry. I'm not even a resident of any of the East End towns or villages that we've been petitioning, but I live out here. And, by that I mean I have friends in these towns. I eat at these restaurants in these towns. I'm in Riverhead every week to go to Costco and to run errands. So when I spoke at the meeting in Riverhead about 2 weeks ago, I said that. I don't personally believe that it matters where you lay your head. We're a united East End community, and what are borders anyway, right? So I shared in my case that I had family in Minnesota too, and that I've seen firsthand what happens when ICE comes into communities and there's no ground plan in place when action needs to be taken. I've seen kids afraid to go to school. I've seen people who are too afraid to seek medical help. All the reasons that we don't want this to happen here. So um, I would encourage everyone to show up if you can. You're able to send emails into the boards, you're able to join via Zoom meetings, but I personally think that showing up in person is really important. I like looking people who are in positions of power in the eye. I think it's meaningful. But if you can't do that, um, I really think it's important to make your statement personal. Write it down. Remember that you can take notes into these meetings. You don't have to memorize everything in your head. You can just go up there and read it. In my case, nobody even responded to what I said. They looked at me and had nothing to say. So I suspect that that is an ongoing case, but maybe other people who have spoken in other towns had different experiences. But I think that if you talk about your connection to the town, even if you don't live there, talk about your fears about ICE coming into your communities. Why does this matter to you? And you can also, I think, turn whatever you write into emails and send them in across the board anywhere. So make the most use of the effort that you're putting out. I know this is maybe an unpopular opinion, but you can even put those notes into a chat GPT and turn them into a letter to the editor and send them out to your local newspapers. I mean, any way that you can really get in front of as many people as possible, I think is really important right now. And in addition to petitioning the town boards, I think that it's important that we're petitioning friends and family too. Getting in front of our communities is really important and engaging with people over this stuff, and not in a way that is, shaming people into submission or anything like that. But I know that when larger structures start to crumble, it's really important that we strengthen our ties with communities. Minerva, you spoke to this very briefly just minutes ago. So something that I did, for example, when I first joined the board at OLA was to send out emails to friends and family to say, hey, this is something that's come across my desk. Take a look at this legislation and let me know what you think. And, not everybody responded, but that's okay because the next time I saw them, more often than not, they brought it up and we had conversations. And I think that that's really important too. You're laying the groundwork for something and you're strengthening the bonds within your community. And when you awaken a consciousness about something, especially to people who might not have been thinking about something previously, you create connection. And then when you have connection with somebody, that fosters care. And when you care about something, you want to be accountable to it. So all of these things matter. Showing up in ways big and small, I think, is really important. And the other thing that I'll say is that OLA has done a really good job, I think, in conjunction with Anita Boyer, to put together resources for you. So there's a whole double-page list of talking points. If you're not sure what you'd like to say, you can refer to those talking points. They're made public to everybody. And we've also put together a list of when all the town board meetings are happening. It's a very easy resource. The links to the Zoom meetings are right there in the document, and you can click right in and join. So, yeah, I encourage everybody to try and do that.
Wonderful. Minerva, you have something to add on, please.
I just want to add on. Yeah, so I did on 639, I put the Google form, so you have that. And then I just posted, I think, what is just the list that Anita put together for all of the town and village meetings that are coming up. She and I were trying to make sure that people knew the difference between, and I think most people in Peer probably do, but between just a regular public meeting, a work session, and a public hearing, because folks that show up when you're not on the agenda, and for all these other boards we're not on the agenda yet, it's still important that people are there. But if the agenda is huge, or you can join by Zoom if you can't be there for 3 hours. Sometimes the meetings aren't that long, but to just know the difference so you don't think that you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. If we're not on the agenda, I think, Anita, we're trying to like either color code it or make sure that you know that's a public meeting, that's a work session, or that's a public hearing. And a work session is great because we'll be on the agenda. A public hearing will be on the agenda. The regular public meetings were not, but it's also a really important time to say this needs to be on the agenda, it needs to be a work session. You need to put this thing through. It's a very important law. It's kind of what's moving the needle forward are people showing up at those public meetings. But I do understand that there's a time commitment when you're showing up to one of those meetings and we're not on the agenda, but know that it's not a mistake. It's what we need to do to move this process forward. Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. That was a really terrific overview, and you brought out a number of excellent points. Let's be in touch with family and friends. That's an important thing to do. And we can show up in towns and villages that we don't reside in because we do use their services. And it is the public comment period. Everybody in the public has a chance to speak. I'll just say for myself, I went to one meeting in the village of Sag Harbor, and when they decided not to have their early 15-minute public time for input. I had to leave because I had another appointment, but I then was in my car, was able to speak via Zoom. So, if you can't stay for the whole meeting, go home or wherever and get on to Zoom. Let me ask you this. There's a number of people in the meeting tonight who are involved in groups. Would it make sense for us to meet with some of the board members to try to lobby them on the legislation?
I mean, I'm going to say yes. There are a couple of people out there that there's a gentleman over in Southampton Village who reached out to me to offer to do that. And I said, absolutely. So he took it upon himself to go to a meeting to speak about it. He wrote a letter to the editor. He's been staying on it. And so it couldn't do any harm. I think understanding maybe where we are in the flow of things, like Riverhead, we're still in a tough spot. Southold, pretty tough spot. East Hampton, I feel like we're in a more positive spot. So I feel like the energy around those tones can be maybe a little bit different. But honestly, it's person to person. Whatever you want to bring forward, I think it absolutely. If it matters to you, that's what matters. You're part of this community. So I don't have any desire to kind of, whatever, edit that or guide that. I think it's really important because it matters to you, and let those towns and village leadership let them understand that this is you bringing it. You don't have to, I think it's super powerful.
And there's been a lot of public actions, rallies, or just vigils. I mean, how effective, talk about the effectiveness of that form of advocacy.
Rebecca?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about in general our protests working, just not even about this particular bill, but about everything. And, the way that I feel about that is that in times like this, it's really important to show up, especially when you're asked by communities of color. And so I think that showing up and making your body present and taking time out of your day to say this matters, I don't think is a waste of time. In terms of like, is it working to push the legislation forward? I think that's probably more of a question for Minerva. The back end workings of that I'm not as tuned into, but it's really community that I have a pulse on, and I do think those things matter in terms of that and building, strength and ties that way.
I think in Riverhead, it's actually making a big difference. I think Riverhead early on, unfortunately, it's kind of hard to watch, but when you have people that are telling their personal stories of fear and their children's fear, seemingly landing on potentially deaf ears is hard to watch. But then when we're seeing other people kind of showing up that are speaking to other aspects of that, and not necessarily immigrants themselves, you start to see a bit of a change. I do think I'm meeting with Halpin tomorrow as a result of people showing up and really pushing that board. I really do think that's what it's about. So yeah, I think it makes a big difference.
If I could also add, I think it makes a difference with people who are not actively engaged either. I think that there's something about, what are you doing over there and why is this mattering to you?
Mm.
That really is strong.
Mhm.
Gets people curious about what's happening. And we need to recruit more people. More people need to get curious and need to care.
There are other aspects, but well, they're not really about this law, so I guess I'll leave that off to the side. But if people have interest in, I would love some support in some of the foiling that we like to do. We don't do a lot of it, but because it's time consuming, but there are just ways of making sure that we just sort of keep some honesty and some knowledge about what might be going on, or at least the fact that we can ask for that information, even if it's a long time coming. But it's that process. If there are people that love doing things like that, please reach out.
No, that's great. Thank you for mentioning that, Minerva, because, just to step back for a moment, the great thing about vigils or about rallies is that, you bring people out that maybe haven't been engaged before, and once they've taken one step, then they may take another step, like go before a town board meeting or send an email. But is there work that OLA needs, like you just mentioned, foiling, or do you need volunteers? Can you put out a call if you do tonight so that we know what you might need going forward to help, not just with this legislation, but, with other activities that OLA is engaged in?
Yeah, we do have a pretty wide range. A lot of transportation we need. There's a lot of ice check-ins that are happening in Syosset, which is a very long drive, but we've seen a bit more of those. Not like 10 in a week or anything. Maybe sometimes 3 in a week. But a community member from the East End needing to go out to Syosset for a check-in, we don't like to send that person alone. And we prep everything, we plan everything out, but those drives and also just local drives to doctor's appointments, sometimes as far as Stony Brook, Setauket, but mostly local. And these are folks that are oftentimes going for cancer treatment or taking their children for an important appointment, scheduled appointment, not a sick child in your car sneezing on everything. But these are like usually critical appointments. We've got children that are terminal. We've got work that we're doing with community members that just do not have the ability to get where they need to go, and there's not necessarily a way to organize that besides having and we have a person who's dedicated to driving people and arranging transportation. We have an Ola minivan, and she's on the road every day. But we have a lot of requests that we can't always make. So I'd say that would be a big one as well. Court observation is one. So everyone probably should have my email, but if you're interested in court observation, that's been a critical component for us to not have a adversarial relationship, but actually develop really great relationships with local courts like East Hampton Town. We have a great relationship in that court right now because we are so vested. Also, Riverhead Town, I have a staff member there. We have a volunteer who's just finishing up some work as a court observer in the Southampton, the Hampton Bays Court. We would love Southold to be covered. We would love Shelter Island to be covered. And it might just be going once a week, or even if you can only make it once every other week and someone else is handling the rest. And you're just simply taking notes about what you're seeing. And we keep that in a share drive so that we can be ready if we do need to get a transcript or foil or help someone that might be unlawfully evicted or someone who is just going through a horrible time, and we can potentially support through some of our food resources. And it's also just a great way to kind of keep an eye on what is happening in the courts. If we see a flood, that's how we kind of learned about certain activities that were going on with a new law that came out in one of the villages. It happened to be because we had court observers paying a lot of attention every single week about the change of what is this new law that's being enforced. So it's a really important piece, and you don't have to speak. You're not advocating for anyone. You are sitting quietly in the second row, taking notes with a pen and paper. So if that's something that could be interesting to you, and foiling, those are the things that I would say are our biggest needs.
That's great. So drop your email in the chat, or whoever they should contact if it's somebody else at
I'm
the
going to give it me
organization.
because I have an assistant who will then help me, do some traffic control, but I'm going to give you my email address.
Okay.
Yeah.
And while you're doing that, I just definitely want to urge everybody who hasn't yet gone to a board meeting to make a pledge tonight to go to a board meeting in your own town or village sometime in the next month or two to advocate for this legislation. You'll feel really good afterward. And as Rebecca gave some really terrific tips, you don't have to be an expert on the legislation. You just have to speak from your heart and say this is something that will make our town safer. And that's something that everybody, is interested in. So let me ask Jerry if there are questions in the chat that we need to address to our special guests.
I see nothing additional that hasn't been addressed. One thing here, any experience with Suffolk legislature? Anyone?
This is a local law, so we're not going to Suffolk County to have them enact this law. Not because that wouldn't be a cool thing, but because ultimately our police departments don't report to Suffolk County Police, so our local entities have a lot of their own power. And so we're trying to not take it out of their hands. We're trying to say, hey, listen, you've got your own power, your ability to do these things, and it's important that you do that, and no one else has to tell you to do that from the county level. Of course, whatever comes from the state level, we're hoping, we know that that would be the law of the state, but it doesn't make a lot of sense right now with the landscape, the political landscape, to necessarily push for that when it almost feels like apples to oranges when you're dealing with local law enforcement, and then you're saying, well, the county is telling you to do it, or the county says to do it. It really wouldn't. I don't think it's a good strategy in this particular sense, maybe in other places. But Fred, how do you think about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, the county legislature has, Suffolk has got this weird system where there's a county police district. The county police only cover the 5 West End towns, and then they have, as far as general policing, and then special, departments, et cetera, within the police departments, where they provide assistance to the local East End. So the county legislature would have no jurisdiction, or really could do nothing with regard to the local police departments. They have nothing to say. So, the question is, this right now is focused on the 5 East End towns. That's OLA's primary,
And the villages.
and villages. But that's the coverage area. And frankly, that's been hard enough. So, so the county legislature with the police department there would only cover the 5 West End towns, wouldn't help with the East End.
Okay. And one final, when and how will you share what you find out tomorrow with your meeting with Halpin and the RH board?
I mean, a lot of what we're putting out there, we can't really keep our website up to every second. We're trying to share news. So if you happen to be on a social media platform like Instagram or Facebook, we might announce there. We'll definitely announce there for sure. We know that the press will be there. We think they'll put something out pretty quickly, and then when they put it out, then we grab it, make a PDF, and put it on our website. We don't have like an email blast for every one of these. It's just hard. It's just hard with all the other stuff that we've got going on, because this is one of the hugest things that we're working on. But as you know, we have an immigration team, and the immigration process right now is extremely difficult, and they're changing it up every second. So we've got that. We've also got adolescent mental health that we're dedicated to, and a lot is going on in that space as well. So we're trying to get the word out as quickly as we can, but I would say you might have to look for it, or if you've got my email now, you can reach out. It could, because I have an assistant. Her name is Jen. She's amazing. If we've got a few different people reaching out, we can get back, but we're trying to get the word back out as quickly as we can. So it's my long way of saying we'll do our best.
Is that meeting a work session or private, someone asks?
No, this is a public hearing. This is the last stop. So this is the last stop where they've already done the work session that Fred led. Thankfully.
Minerva, I think she's referring to Riverhead.
Yeah.
Riverhead.
Oh.
Yeah.
Riverhead meeting.
Yeah, Riverhead.
Oh, I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
I'm so
that's
sorry.
what it is.
No, this is private. This is private. So this
Yeah.
was something that finally got put together on the book. So it's not public. But whatever comes of this, I will make public, and so that we can move to the next step. But yeah, thank you.
With that in mind, I just want to ask Fred, because a number of the people here on the call are from Riverhead, and they've been very active. And Fred, in your work as an assembly person out on the East End for so many years, you might know some of the people on the board. I mean, what strategy can you give these sort of seasoned grassroots activists to?
Yeah. First of all, I never had the joy of actually representing Riverhead. It's never been part of my district. There's to be honest, there's a lot of, I mean, the new Supervisor Halpin, that was a big upset last year. He beat the incumbent. Riverhead is a difficult political climate. That is my diplomatic way of saying that. And the only thing you got to show up. You got to, you got to make people uncomfortable sometimes, by showing up, not, and I when I mean uncomfortable, I don't mean, you're cordial, you're professional, you're respectful, but they don't want to talk about this. So you kind of have to force them to talk about it a little bit. And the only way you can do that is by showing up. I don't have any secret formula for unlocking the key to Riverhead. It's just a difficult climate there, and there's a lot of relatively new, you have a brand new town supervisor basically, and so I don't have as much a read on them as I would in the areas that I actually represented.
Yeah.
I will share that, what we want to make sure that doesn't happen, because it's the same playbook that has been used as OLA has been progressing through many different policy needs and gaps, is the idea of conversation, or the fact that we're going to be meeting, is to have that be some sort of currency to trade in, like, oh, we had a meeting. I'm going to make sure that that doesn't get used as currency. So for us right now, it is really nailing down what are those next steps. What are the conflicts that you have? What are the concerns that you have? Put them on paper. Let's talk about what you actually are concerned with, because what I've seen over and over again from some of the pushback of town leadership and some village leadership is just misinformation, that you're taking power away from local law enforcement, that you're putting local law enforcement in an adversarial position with federal agents, that things that are not in the law, so things that have been constructed as sort of boogeymen, that if for me to get someone to put that on paper and commit to, oh, is that your concern? Is that your issue? Then let's talk about that. And that will be made public. So I'm not keeping those things private, but this is a moment for me to kind of have some things put on paper about what exactly he can say is holding them back from at least progressing this to a work session, taking this seriously enough to hear his own constituents of Riverhead, and to have this be seriously considered as law of the land.
Yeah, I think that would be super helpful. So then those of us that are going to the meetings, that then we can call out the specific town board members and the supervisor and say, like, this is your issue. Can you please explain? And then we can keep having, like, productive, because we can't keep going and saying the same thing. I think if we have those targeted topics, that would be really helpful. I know Carrie, goes regularly. All of us, Allison, who's on the call, has showed up. So, like, just to have those specific talking points would be amazing.
But you know what I could do also, since I put the link into our Google form, in the Google form, you have a link in Spanish and English to the law, and then you have a link in Spanish and English to some talking points.
Yeah.
I think what I could do, that now that we're progressing to a certain level, is maybe have Riverhead talking points, Southold talking points, maybe that we can make that a little bit deeper and expand it. So thank you for giving me that. I appreciate that.
Brianne, I have a question for you. In the comments, you wrote that when you've spoken with the Riverhead Town Board members, that they haven't responded to anyone when we've spoken in support. Is this when you're at a town meeting and speaking orally to them, or is this in written?
So I've spoken on Zoom. Like, I spoke when Rebecca was there on Zoom. Carrie spoke on Zoom. Allison spoke on Zoom. No, like, anytime the OLA legislation is brought up, it's just like blank faces, and they'll respond to other issues, but they won't respond to anything about OLA.
Wow.
And, like, in numerous sessions.
They've also tried to use the Hispanic Business Advisory Council. In the very beginning, they did that, but then that person who was the chair of that said, no, that's not us. Like, we're focusing on business, which of course that committee should be weighing in, because businesses have been affected by these raids. But he's got his own personality, and that's not, there's no assumption that because he's Latino, he's for this law. I mean, there's some reality around that. But the town board, or not Halpin, but the other guy, Rothstein, I think, who's the liaison to Rothwell, is a liaison to the law enforcement, I believe. And so I think they've been kind of pointing the fingers like this, but they kind of have exhausted that. So I feel at this point, they're going to make some big hay of the fact that they made time to meet with OLA. But I'm going to make as much hay about what actually got discussed and what of any sort of concrete value was presented as a reason to not move forward, at least to a work session and take this seriously. And whatever that is, I will be sharing that with the press, both to Prensa Local, Riverhead Local, any other press that wants to talk about it. It will be a public conversation from me about what I learned in that meeting. Cindy has her, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that.
Okay.
I just want to actually step in if you don't mind, and because I know that there's a couple questions I think that are coming from Riverhead, and I know there's also a question in the chat about the county. So let's stick with Riverhead. Allison, you actually had your hand up for a while, and then you'd put it down. So I'm going to ask for you to speak, and then we'll have Cindy, and then we can go to the chat question. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me?
Mhm.
Weird echo. I like the idea of having the talking points, but like Brienne said, they stare at us like with these blank expressions. So I loved Carrie's little speech. No, I shouldn't call it a little speech. Carrie's speech that she gave at the last meeting, because it was different than the time before, and it was different than an OLA talking point. It was more like pointed about, here are the people who signed my petition. There are this, there are that, there are this. So there weren't a lot, but there were a representative group from Riverhead. And like I threw it at my speech that I made, kind of threw it back at them. Well, you guys are very into your school resource officers in Riverhead. We have SROs, and what's the reason behind having SROs, police officers, in our schools, which I'm not a big supporter of, but we have them. And it's to create this sense of safety and community among our students that they have a connection with police. So why wouldn't we want to then expand that idea with the OLA legislation to, have the whole community have this relationship with the police? So I feel like changing up the narrative a little bit maybe sometimes gets their little brains thinking like, oh, maybe this does make sense. And I think it makes sense that it's people like Carrie and Brienne and myself and Cindy and everybody else who live in Riverhead and know kind of the people that are on the town board, but also know other avenues to like work their way in. But I do like the idea of having the talking points, because some people are not as comfortable speaking in front of a crowd. So I think that was, that's excellent. So thank you for all that you're doing. And I look forward to hearing the response tomorrow.
Okay. Can I send any notes? I'll try to get it. It'll go to the press. But if I have some notes that are very specific, Catherine, can I send them to you?
Yeah, if you send them to me, I'll circulate them to everybody who's on the call. Okay, great. Cindy.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Like Fred said, Riverhead is a very difficult nut to crack. And I would say that Jerry Halpin, who is a very good person, but is the lone not Republican on the board. And he's, I think, having trying to sort that out. But I would suggest, Minerva, that if you can, in terms of the population and the base of the Republicans, they're all pro-ICE and yeah, go get them. So I think that the message in Riverhead specifically has to be more about public safety and how Riverhead appears to other people. Like, we don't want to be the animal and the vicious animal on the island. I think that would be helpful. I also want to say that I've also gotten up and spoken in front of the town board a million times, and they just don't say anything unless I really hit a nerve, and then they push back. But you can just pour your heart out and with tears streaming down your face, and they just look at you. Matter of fact, the last time I was up there, I said, for all I know, you're all sitting there wondering what you're going to watch on TV when you leave here. Because that's what it's like. So that would be my strongest suggestion, would be to just, rather than, they're not concerned about the Latino community suffering. As a matter of fact, that is to some degree for some of them a win. So in terms of just public safety and the greater
local
good,
economy.
Local
Look at our main
economy.
street.
Yeah.
Local
And then
economy.
have you spoken with Chief Frost at all? Have you met with him?
Yeah, I met with him in the past. I did not put together a tour of law enforcement leadership. I definitely want to see our electeds do their job. But we cannot underestimate that there are many, many chiefs and law enforcement leaders that are definitely telling their towns and villages, don't pass this.
I think I think that he is a pretty good human being.
No, I
And
think people are good human
yeah,
beings.
well, but
I'm
I
not
mean,
making those judgments, but I'm just saying that as a matter
no,
of course, I
yeah,
think that law enforcement does not want to hit a precedent where now this OLA, in combination with members of the community, that we have a law now put in place that tells them what they have to do, that we originated. It's just simply not something that happens. And so
right.
it's not about being a bad person. It's about setting a precedent that I don't think local law enforcement wants to let get set. And Fred could correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's a huge piece.
Two things. First of all, I think you're right on target. I think that's not wanting to give you a win. And the second thing is, hi, Cindy Clifford. Long time no see.
Nice to see you. Okay.
I hope all is well.
Yeah, well enough. I'm living in Riverhead, I got the scars to prove it.
Okay.
One point I want to put out there too, and Halpin is a supervisor, but you've got all the other board members as well that have to take their own level of accountability. One of them is Merrifield. Merrifield is the right name, right? Merrifield?
Yeah.
So I realized the name. I'm like, wait a minute. We've been on the CAP, with the work that we do with students, with youth. We've been on that consortium committee for a long time. And she's a big person on that in terms of safety for the students and mental health for the students. So depending upon what each of those board members are sort of doing, that has nothing to do with the other aspects of what they believe in, like public safety, like public health, education, these types of things. These are things to also learn about the board members to know, hey, listen, if that matters to you, let's look at an aspect of this law that could be very positive for what you're trying to do in terms of schools and student health. So there are things, those angles are all very important as well. And we try to take a look at all of that, one by one when we can.
Yeah. I think Ken Rothwell, just
Mhm.
he's a lost cause. I don't even look in his direction.
Mm.
Bob Kern's very motivated by finances.
Mhm.
If it's going to save money or make money,
Mhm.
he's down with that. Joanne Waskey is very rooted to her. I'm just a girl who grew up in Riverhead and I love Riverhead. So if I think that they can be reached, or I would try to reach her through, these are your neighbors. These are people who live here, who are here legally, who, we're not talking about, the horrible ones. We're talking about people who are raising their families and going to church on Sundays, and they're part of this fabric of our community. But, again, they seem to have resistance to having compassion. So, and Denise was a prosecutor, for a career prosecutor. So
well, when people think something's being taken away from them, it's a very different perspective than something being given to them. And I think also the way that we have to present,
yes,
because it's the truth, is you're not losing something. You're not losing the game. You're not losing power. You're not losing money. You're not the things that you're gaining, we can list out. But I do feel that, it becomes this sort of automatic us versus them, but they're not losing anything. And I think that part of it, which has to be rooted in love and true compassion, has to come out. And no matter how we might feel about some different members of these towns and villages, is that if what we're motivated by is the true health and compassion and love that we feel for these communities, you feel that in a room. You
right,
feel it. It's not touchy feely, whatever. It's real, and
right.
that has to be what we stand for.
And also the idea that we want everyone to respect and trust and have faith in the police force. We need everyone to know that if you're in trouble, they're your go-to people, and not to have them be perceived as risky. So
Right.
I think there's a lot of value in that argument as well. And, of course, thanks for this, Minerva.
Yeah.
No. Thank you, Cindy.
Yeah.
Great to see you here
Yeah,
too.
and Cindy, thanks so much for putting that out there, Allison as well, and Brienne. I mean, it's really helpful for you tomorrow, Minerva. We wish you well at that meeting. And we are at 8 o'clock, but I noticed that I think there is one more question in the chat about the county, Jerry, if you wanted to just put that out there.
It was a refinement on Michelle's last thing. She said her question is about Suffolk legislation, relates to wondering whether the proposed OLA legislation for 5 East End towns seems useful for relatability, usability by or for the county.
Could this law be adapted and be approved by the county? If that's the question, the answer is yes. I took a look. There's nothing in the local law that wouldn't apply to a municipality that's a county with their own police department. So yes, you could adapt it for a county local law.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. I'm in town of Brookhaven, and what you described about the board's reactions to people sounds like town of Brookhaven. But also in Suffolk County, there have been a lot of incidents, and this is something that we can use in our villages too, including Patchogue, which has been targeted as well a little bit in Belport. So thank you so much for all of this, and hello to Minerva. I haven't seen you for years.
Hi there.
Great. No, it's great to have everyone here together, and it would be great to, take this to the county, and perhaps, once we get, well, perhaps there will be people who do that going forward.
It's something to talk to Ann Welker about at the appropriate time. I don't think right now is the right time. Let's put some runs on the board on the East End first, I think, is where the
And
priority has to be.
Greg too.
Yeah. No, that makes great sense. So listen, it's after 8 o'clock. I think we can close it up unless anybody has something that they really want to ask Minerva or Fred or Rebecca while we're here. If so, raise your hand. If not, this meeting has been recorded so that you can share it with people. A lot of wonderful information. I can't thank Minerva, Fred, and Rebecca enough for the time and their talents and their energy and their inventive, entrepreneurial attitude towards trying to make our world a safer place and our area a safer place. So thank you, Minerva. Please be in touch with me regarding tomorrow, and I can share out to everybody who's here. And for those of you who are interested in healthcare, join us Monday night for the Long Island Hub. I just dropped in the chat again the link for that. And if you would like to join Peer, I just dropped in the chat how you're able to do that. So Fred, Minerva, Rebecca, any last words you might want to offer us, please?
I just want to thank Fred and Rebecca for being on the OLA board and for doing as much as you're doing. Your involvement is everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's a privilege. Thank you.
Yeah.
What a great meeting.
Great meeting. Everybody has said many thanks to you in the chat. So thank you all for your good works. Let's stay in touch. Let's work together. Let's get all the towns passing this legislation. All right. See you at the Riverhead Town Board meeting.
Appreciate it.
Good night.
Good night, Fred.
Good night.
Good night, Minerva.